Minnesota Vikings training camp on a brief break, which gives us a chance to look around the rest of the NFC North and see what's going on. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. The Vikings were off on Thursday, so there's not a lot of updating to do. If you really want some nugget of Vikings news, they signed Matt Nelson. He's a journeyman O-line, practice squad guy who's been around since 2019. He's been in the league for quite a bit. They waived injured Alexander Moosh Williams. He'll probably revert to IR. And then I don't know what the injury is there. And then settlement or whatever. But Matt Nelson joins the team. Probably not that consequential. What is consequential is how things are going in the NFC North. It's something I feel like has been something of a blind spot for me over the last few years, is that I don't really give you the sense for what's going on elsewhere in the division. And this is Locked On Vikings. It's not Locked On NFC North. We don't have to talk about this every day. But on days where it's a little slower for the Vikings because they didn't practice, it makes sense to take a look. Plus, the Hall of Fame game just happened, and the Lions were in it. So let's start there. The Detroit Lions played in the Hall of Fame game. It was not great for the Lions. You can go listen to Matt Derry and Locked On Lions. He did his whole show recapping everything that happened, that went wrong, that went right. And, the other Locked On hosts were a big resource for this. I went and looked at everything you guys were all talking about. So thank you, Matt, Peter, and Lauren. But for what Matt has been talking about is the theme seems to be intensity, right? It seems like the Lions camp has been very intense. And even with practice fights coming and stuff. And that is very on brand for them, right? To have this really physical, intense training camp thing to happen. But it's also the kinds of headlines you expect to see from a team that's in a fairly stable place, right? There's not a lot of question marks. There's maybe a position battle here or there. There's a contract thing with Alex Anzalone. That's something to keep an eye on, that they want. Alex Anzalone wants a new contract. I don't know if Detroit's going to do it, right? He's an older player. They might want to replace him with some fresh meat. And otherwise, it's about kind of the vibes of practice. And for a team that is known to be that physical, they are going to be that physical at camp. They've also had a little bit of an injury bug. We spoke about that last time we looked at all of these other teams, with, Alan McNeil's being hurt and Levi Onwuzurike is hurt again. That is also going to have an impact. And I think, I can't answer the question, but I think I can ask it, which is the level of physicality leading to more injuries? It's something I might ask Matt when we have our NFC North roundtable thing, which I'm sure we'll do shortly. But that kind of level of intensity, and I think I'm sensing an anger from the Lions, and it's super understandable considering the way that their season ended. They're going to come out hot. They're going to come out really, really pissed off, at least the veterans. But those veterans are not the ones who play a lot of the Hall of Fame game. And the Hall of Fame game went pretty poorly for the Lions. They lose 34-7 to the Chargers, and Trey Lance kind of comes away as the star of that game. But for the Lions, I think some interesting things that they learned that I actually would be fascinated to watch just from an academic standpoint. Look, they're not happy with it. The game starts with this muffed fumble disaster thing. On the literal opening kickoff, and it just kind of spirals and gets worse from there. In at least my experience covering a team, when you see those kinds of preseason games, isolate the people who are responsible for the problems, and then those guys are probably going to get cut. And so these sorts of things tend to solve themselves, but that's going to be what the discourse is around Detroit. And that's what I'm trying to do right now, is get a sense for, or talk through a sense for what it's like in Detroit, in Green Bay, in Chicago. And in Detroit, the current moment is, whoa, the Hall of Fame game was bad. Should we be concerned about it? The answer is probably no once you have 2 seconds to think about it. But I would say one concern that they might have is at backup quarterback. Kyle Allen threw 2 picks right away. He sort of bounced back a little bit, and then eventually he left the game. In comes Hendon Hooker, who plays a totally normal game, but there's kind of 2 interesting nuggets there. One, that Kyle Allen is ahead of Hendon Hooker on that depth chart. It sounds like they've been splitting reps, second and third team, and Kyle Allen comes out first, and Hendon Hooker comes out second. That is a pretty clear message to me on where that depth chart is, and definitely might be something of a surprise to people who don't have anti-Tennessee biases stemming from directly Hendon Hooker, from specifically Hendon Hooker. That's a lore drop for those of you who are new to this show. Okay, you're gonna have to ask somebody sitting next to you to catch you up. But the point I'm making is, Hendon Hooker, when they drafted him, was supposed to be the backup quarterback. This was supposed to be a Kellen Mond thing. Hendon Hooker was not going to be the starter. I think anyone who said that was kind of insane. They were very locked in on Jared Goff. But it was supposed to be, hey, here's your kind of mid-round guy, middle of the draft guy, come be our backup. And he is unable to win that job. He wasn't able to win that job over free agent Teddy Bridgewater last year in the playoffs. That's who came in when Jared Goff had to leave for a series. So the Lions might have a backup QB problem after the game that Kyle Allen had, and then knowing that they trust Hendon Hooker at best the same amount as that, but kind of worse because he was on the third team. The Lions might be the team that ends up in the market for Kenny Pickett, Jameis Winston out of New York, like these kind of extraneous quarterbacks that might end up being, somebody tries to eke a little bit of extra value out of their depth if they see a younger guy that they like. Just from a QB carousel perspective, that's really interesting. If I'm the Lions, though, I think you'd be crazy to panic over a bad Hall of Fame game. Again, the culprits will likely be cut or will at least lose those jobs if they've got like too much guaranteed money on their contract to be cut or whatever. But that's how this tends to happen. The culprits just get axed, and then that's that. And then the other thing, too, is it is the Hall of Fame game. They've had like 2 weeks of camp. Like, you expect it to be a little sloppy at this point. So certain, mental mistakes and miscommunications and problems that could lead to interceptions are understandable because of where you're at in the preseason. Everyone's first preseason game has a little bit of sloppy to it, and this one has one less week of practice than all of those games have. So you don't expect to see a ton of polish. And then, of course, the players who are actually going to drive the success or failure of the Detroit Lions were in sweatpants on the sideline. So, like, whatever. The Lions are in a place where they're trying their best to stay the course and fight against the forces of entropy, right? And that's not unlike where the Packers are. Where these teams that have most of a core, they have an understanding of who they are and who their team is built around, and they're trying to plug holes as much as they can while also, preventing or plugging any new holes that come up as players get old, players leave for whatever reason, players get injured, and etc. And they're just sort of fighting the tide. And that's very much what's going on in Packers camp as well. We'll talk about the Packers next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Monarch Money. If you have ever wished that managing your money felt easier, it can be so overwhelming to have to track and like every little thing you spend money on in your budget and then try to add it all up and then realize that, oh my God, I spent way more than I have to. And then you have to go back into that crazy itemized list. Whatever it is, whether you're trying to just balance your budget or grow your savings, plan a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's so much more than a budgeting app. It does help you organize your budget, but it's a financial command center. You can set financial goals. If you're trying to say, I want to save up so I can afford this car or so I can afford a down payment on a house, you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. You're not just managing your money, you're building wealth. And all of those things that you maybe have 2 or 3 financial apps on your phone, one for budgeting, one for my investments, one for this, one for that. It can combine all of that into one easy and convenient place. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Moving on with Locked On Vikings podcast, it is time to talk about the Green Bay Packers. There is an interesting vibe coming from, okay, so like looking at what Peter Bukowski is talking about or has been talking about. 3 of his last 7 shows have been about Matthew Golden. And that mirrors a lot of what the national discussion around the Packers has been, is that all eyes are on Matthew Golden. They need so much out of Matthew Golden. The perception of the Packers, I don't know if I agree with it, but this is the perception, is that Jordan Love is absolutely able to take them to the promised land. You just need to get him someone to throw to. And you're even pretty happy with the O-line, right? You got Elton Jenkins. He moved to center. Josh Myers departed this offseason. Zach Tom just got this big extension. So they've got these pieces of this O-line that they're pretty happy with. They've got Jordan Love. But what they did last year was essentially get really excited about like the Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs, Christian Watson kind of trio being the next thing, all this young talent, these really exciting receivers. And then those guys didn't show up. And so I think I do agree with this. If I were to look at like why the Packers didn't achieve as much as they wanted to last year, they sneak into the 7th seed, they bounce in the first round. And why they went 1-5 in the division is that they didn't get enough juice out of those pass catchers. Even like Tucker Kraft, who I think is a perfectly adequate tight end, you wanted more out of it, right? And that's why they go and get Matthew Golden in the first round. And so I think the reason I'm setting it all up so broad and like big picture is that it seems to me, and hey, look, Packers fans, okay, if you're like hate listening to me, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to me like this season feels like the one where they said, we are 1 X away, and here's that X, right? And X equals Matthew Golden. We are a Matthew Golden away. Here's the Matthew Golden. Is he going to be the guy we need him to be? And that becomes the operative question in camp. But it's kind of funny when you have teams like the Lions and Packers who are more or less running it back, right? This is the Jordan Love, Matt LaFleur offense. Here's all, we got Josh Jacobs is the guy. The O-line is what it is. The defense is built around the same people. They are running a lot of it back, appropriately so. I don't think that that's a crazy thing for them to do at all when you make the playoffs. And then just like hoping that they can kind of plug the holes as they come up and then add just like the right talent at the right time to take them over the top, right? So when you get teams in that position, the training camp headlines get hilarious because there's not a lot of intrigue. There's no QB battle going on for anyone to cover in Green Bay, right? There is no, outside of Matthew Golden, there's not a lot of this year will only work if we see X in training camp. Right. You know what this team is going to be, and they've earned, they can put a little, if Jordan Love has a bad day in camp, nobody is going, what does that mean for the Packers' future? Right. Like, no, you just go, all right, he had an off one. You like move on. Right. And so, the day-to-day coverage of Jordan Love and all that stuff is always going to be somewhere there. But some of the headline, there was a piece on SI that I read when I was researching for this, that Rashawn Gary has decided that he's not going to wear gloves anymore. And here's what that means. It's like, okay, this is what we were talking about at Packers camp. Seems like they're going to be about the same team as they were last year. And because there's not a lot to update you on, the deck chairs getting rearranged becomes the news of the day. There's nothing wrong with that. It means you're in a stable position. But there are a couple of weird little stories coming out of Green Bay that I find kind of fun. I don't think they're particularly consequential for the season the Packers are going to have. That's just going to be, again, up to how consistent can Jordan Love be? That was my question for them last year, and I think that was a pretty good way to define their season. So I'm running that one back. All eyes on Matthew Golden. Is he going to be the guy? Are these other receivers going to be able to step up and do more like Dobbs or like Tucker Kraft, for example? Luke Musgrave, can he become more of a guy? But there are a couple interesting things. For one, they've taken Bo Melton, their like wide receiver 5, the kind of rotational guy that had a couple interesting moments. I think he scored on us in the New Year's game in 2023, the Jaren Hall does like catastrophe game. I think Bo Melton scored on the Vikings in that one. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that receiver has been moved to corner and is like kind of playing. Corner is maybe the position that the Packers have the most concerns at least as I look at their roster. They've got Carrington Valentine and like Keyshawn Nixon like starting playing. And Bo Melton is this like sort of camp story as this guy that's like, wait, he's never played this position. He's turning around. He's playing it now. And he actually can like kind of play. Maybe he played in high school. I don't know. I'm not going to look up Bo Melton facts for you, but this is a weird thing going on. And again, when you don't have overarching camp narratives that are about the future of the franchise, or you look at the Titans are not going to cover which of their players are or aren't wearing gloves because the Titans are at a crossroads of the franchise where Cam Ward now needs to become the guy. They're at this big, like, turn the corner pivot point. There's also an interesting thing with Nate Hobbs in Green Bay. He like keeps injuring his teammates. And like sticking up for himself too. He's not saying like, oh, I have to be just more careful. I have to be. He's like, no. Here's what I did. All right. Like I took on the block and then I stepped over there where I was supposed to be. And it was an unfortunate collision, but I didn't do anything wrong. And it's becoming this like really weird controversy that Nate Hobbs keeps like running into people a little bit too hard. But for both the Lions and Packers, these headlines, the fact that they are the headlines sort of evokes a stability. Your foundations are not under any question. Your, load-bearing pillars are known and understood, and nobody needs to write a think piece about them. So we're going to talk about this instead, because we can. When you look at what is going on in Chicago, you get a totally different vibe because the foundations are not stable in Chicago. They have not been for a long time. And that means that you get kind of a media war. It's fascinating from an outside perspective. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. 5-Hour Energy has been on the market for over 20 years now. It came out in 2004, and a couple years after it came out, when it was still very much like a novel product that some people hadn't even really gotten to know yet, I worked at a golf course, the Wilds in Prior Lake. And I would clean clubs and wash the cart. So I would see everybody come in after their rounds, and I started finding a lot of empty 5-Hour Energies in their carts. And I realized that it was like the hot thing to do when you got that sort of 12th, 13th hole lull. Whether you're having the round of your life or you're just trying to survive, you can't golf when you're starting to get a little eepy. So why don't you knock back a 5-Hour Energy? If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off of your order. Take a page out of the book of the people whose clubs I used to clean. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. This code is not good on subscription orders. Let's move along to the most intriguing team by far in the NFC North. If you don't think it's the Vikings, and really the only intriguing thing I think about the Vikings is JJ McCarthy good, which is intriguing, but it's not quite to me on the level of I can't look away as the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears have had an offseason that's genuinely hard to pin, or a camp that's genuinely hard to pin down, because you're getting conflicting reports. Lauren has been all over this over at Locked On Bears, Lauren Cox, and the expectation for the Bears is that they take a big leap. There's a lot of pressure on the Bears. It's been, this is the fourth year of Ryan Poles. They haven't really sniffed the levels of success that he has promised, that they hired him to bring in. He got rid of the quarterback that he cited as a reason that he took the job in the first place. And now they have the golden boy of golden boys in Caleb Williams. They have the hot ticket head coach in Ben Johnson. The whole idea is this team is now supposed to leap directly into the powers of the NFC and be part of the contender conversation when we're talking about it in November and December. Ben Johnson is trying to instill that. And so my best shot at reconciling what we're hearing, you are hearing very mixed things about whether it's going well or poorly. And I think that is one of these unfortunate things about camp, where we live in a world where everything is a microblog. Everything is a tiny little snippet of information. You don't see a vibe from an entire camp practice nearly as often as you see a singular clip on TikTok, or you see a singular tweet or a singular post somewhere, or a one little bite of information. The Bears have had a number of pretty rough moments in camp. A pass sails over Caleb Williams' head. Somebody doesn't have the play calls down right. They don't get the cadence right and they screw up the snap. They don't line up right and Ben Johnson is lighting people up and pulling people in and out of the lineup. And Ben Johnson is a hothead. This is a known thing. He is a light you up kind of coach. He is not the soft-spoken guy that Matt Eberflus was. I think that's probably part of what they were looking for, was a little bit of, fire and brimstone. And so the first day of camp, the media gets to see him in his element, and he's lighting people up and he's going crazy and he's really animated. And you either are looking at that and saying, oh, cool, he's trying to set a new standard of culture in the Chicago Bears, a shot in the arm they really need. Or you're going, wow, the Bears must be playing horribly. This dude's mad. And I think the latter is probably not the conclusion I would come to, but I think that it has sort of leaked into the vibes. Is like, wow, they must be doing so bad considering how mad the coach is. And the coach might just be like that. It might just be kind of how he does it. But regardless of what you think of that, there have been plenty of growing pains. There have been lots of bad moments. These moments have sort of pooled around 2-minute drills. The 2-minute drills have been really consistently poor with the first team. The mistakes have been kind of all over first, second, third team everywhere. And so then you have to start having these discussions about how many mistakes before we start really getting concerned. How much can we chalk up to, well, it's just early in camp and they're learning a new offense and they're getting all the kinks ironed out. How many times can you say, oh, well, better you made that mistake this time and not when the game's counted, before you start getting worried about how many of those mistakes stack up? I don't know the answer to that question. That's a question I posed to Lauren. Okay, Lauren, if you're listening to this, that is my question to you, is how many mistakes happen before you start getting concerned, and have we reached that threshold yet? I don't know the answer to it, but I do want to ask that question. One interesting thing that has popped out to me in some of the clips that I saw and some of the commentary that I saw about Bears camp is the learning curve for Caleb Williams is still very steep. There's still a lot of talk of oh, well, that wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Well, we're not quite where we want to be, but we're getting somewhere, right? And as a second-year QB, I don't think that's crazy. That's not that far off of the way that I talk about J.J. McCarthy's throwing mechanics, right? Well, they're better than they were, but they're not perfect. We're still not quite where we want to be, but we want to see progress, right? I think J.J. McCarthy is having a much more productive camp. I just mean completions and stuff. He's hitting more of the throws. It looks a little bit smoother, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be that he's having a better camp, because he might not be growing as much. He's not maybe challenged as much as someone like Caleb Williams is in Chicago. With the Vikings, though, that's not the challenge that J.J. McCarthy is facing. J.J. McCarthy is facing the challenge of getting blitzed every play and getting really used to that, which is going to be good for him and bad for him in some ways, and kind of the same way that it was back in the peak Zimmer days when Kirk Cousins would get blitzed every single time. And then the offense would be super discombobulated for a while because they could never get a damn snap off. I do worry a little bit about that happening in Minnesota, but it's a different set of challenges, a different kind of difficulty. With Caleb, they're still teaching him new things, including play action footwork. And in particular, getting his head around a little bit faster. It reminds me a little bit of the now famous anecdote about Jared Goff in LA. Part of the reason that he didn't work out with Sean McVay is because to turn around to hand the ball off and take his eyes off the defense, then turn back around and have to reread it, wasn't something that he wasn't fast enough at it. And so a lot of stuff would come out late. A lot of stuff would kind of, lag in the pocket because of that. And they're trying to teach Caleb Williams not to be that guy, right? And who better to do that than the guy who maybe is responsible for Jared Goff growing in that way, Ben Johnson. Because Ben Johnson called a ton of play action for Jared Goff last year. He's great at it now. I mean, he's 30. This is a narrative from Jared Goff when he was in his third year, right? In 2018. Different thing in his age 30 season now here in 2024-25, when now, of course, he's great at that. But You're trying not to have that issue with Caleb Williams. So the idea of getting his head turned around faster in play action, these really fundamental mechanical things. Some of us knew he would need that. Some of us knew. But and thought maybe that he's not going to be the best version of himself day one of his rookie year. So I'm not surprised by it, but I am intrigued that happens to be the thing that they're trying to like hone in on, because that's not the USC offense that he ran, and it's certainly not the Shane Waldron disaster offense that he ran last year. This Ben Johnson offense, trying to get a sense for what that offense is going to be has been one of my biggest like intrigues of the entire offseason NFL wide. What's Ben Johnson going to do with Caleb Williams? And using play action to help the O-line and to help him, hopefully give him more time to read things, more time, and to also just get him on the run in a way where he can, like, he's allowed to break a pocket without it ruining the protection. That makes a lot of sense intuitively to me, to just use a lot of play action. You're probably not going to be able to list a lot of quarterbacks to me that aren't going to benefit from a lot of play action, but you have to be good at play action, and that's the goal that they're trying to pursue. So I don't know, to me, like, big marquee headline of the whole thing that I found from just looking around in this exercise is Bears expected to be more of a play action heavy team than they have been in the past. That's big. That changes a lot about how you're going to plan to defend them. But we're going to see that right away. We're going to see that on Monday Night Football, where you're going to get Caleb versus JJ McCarthy and see all this stuff sort of borne out in front of the national audience and all that stuff. But I think it's really, really intriguing the way that Bears camp has gone by, even if you excuse away the struggles. Which I like, the answer to that is not necessarily that you can't. I'm sure you can, right? That's absolutely. Maybe you're just ironing out a bunch of stuff, challenging them. But even if you do iron that stuff all the way, there's still all these little intrigues about what the Bears are going to be. And I'm fascinated to find out. I will talk to you all next week. Preseason game next week. We have preseason football next weekend. It's almost here. And one thing, before I go, one thing to watch for after, when they take a day off, the last time they take a day off before the preseason can be a depth chart adjustment time, where the coaches come in, they don't have practice, they can watch a little bit of extra film of practice, they can put it all together and make decisions about depth chart stuff, solidify camp battles that they already thought, were going a certain way. And you could see the depth chart look a little bit different next week. So keep an eye out for any changes that might be happening. If they are, that's probably because the coaches had a minute to sort of recalibrate and reevaluate everything they had seen. And then they can make those changes. Okay, I will see you all tomorrow. Or Monday. Goodness gracious. What day is it? What year is it? Who am I? Who are you? All right, have a good weekend. And as always, Skull.